Like all education, like all experience, what we get our knowledge in and what we gain as experience is not merely of our own, but what our colleagues, what our teachers, what our fellow students or fellow employees provide us. Similarly, what we get as an entrepreneur is also dependent on our working relationships with various people and also working with entrepreneurs. Many of us will have an opportunity to work with an entrepreneur in one's life. There are 6 enigmas of working with entrepreneurs which I wanted to discuss, merely because they also provide us lots of insights into what entrepreneurs should do and what they should not do. The first question is a successful startup entrepreneur a successful entrepreneur for life? That is, you start setting up a company. Can you be an entrepreneur setting up companies all through the life? It is possible theoretically, but does it happen that way? The second question is, should one have limits for claiming oneself to be an entrepreneur? How long can you characterize yourself as an entrepreneur, and when does the shift to becoming mainstream industrialist or business person, when does it start? Thirdly, working from that second question, does transition to mainstream industrial status reduce the entrepreneurial passion or the entrepreneurial characteristic that one has? Fourthly, for various people who work with entrepreneurs, how is it different from working with a normal employment situation? And for the entrepreneur himself, is working as an entrepreneur exciting? And finally, how does entrepreneurship get perpetuated in an economy? Does it happen through an expanding circle of entrepreneurship? How does it happen? So, these are the questions which we have. The first question is a successful startup entrepreneur a successful entrepreneur for life? From my experience, I feel that it is not necessary to be so. Somewhere along the path of growth, an entrepreneur becomes a kind of less of an entrepreneur and more of a business person. He either becomes all too adventurous, all too confident, all too smug, or all too obsolete in managing their firms. If such firms continue to be entrepreneur driven, obviously they are likely to face significant downturn. So, again the caveat is, this is not meant to be universal. We are looking at exceptions so that we do not fall into those exceptions. We are looking at aberrations or blips so that we do not get characterized by those aberrations and blips. So, ideally an entrepreneur should always have a good balance between adventurous streak and also growth streak. He should also be confident, but should not be smug or casual about his skill. Similarly, just because an enterprise has been built, it does not mean that he or she will not get obsolete in the line of technology which he or she has chosen. Therefore, one needs to be updated all the time. Therefore, the point here is that as long as you are what you are, even as you progress on your entrepreneurial journey, you are likely to be an entrepreneur for life, not necessarily for that project. And it is not that entrepreneurs do not make mistakes, entrepreneurs do make mistakes, but if they have been able to imbue certain strengths in their organizations, they will outlast the difficulties. For example, Microsoft, it was a great desk operating system company, but it failed to see the kind of impact cloud would make. It did not read well the iPad kind of situation, it did not read well the need for mobile operating system and things like that. However, today Microsoft is one of the highest valued company in the United States of America. Why? Because the founders, the entrepreneurs and the leaders built into the company certain strengths which have been phenomenally strong and which have been able to move the company against those odds into further success again. Similarly, Sony did not read the flat panel revolution right. Samsung took lot of lead in that, yet Sony came back to the reckoning because the company was basically technologically strong, managerially strong. So, the resilience and ability to grow, if these are built into a company, even if some entrepreneurial readings turn out to be incorrect, then the company would grow. But an entrepreneur who ceases to be a good manager or leader or fails to recognize the need for course correction, he is unlikely to transform the company into those kinds of growth engines. On the other hand, an entrepreneur who becomes a good leader, who becomes a wise leader, who has with him leaders who can help him, he is likely to build those strengths. And therefore, it is quite possible for a successful startup entrepreneur to be a successful entrepreneur for life. Then should one have limits for claiming oneself to be an entrepreneur? Probably yes, because once you have got the peak achieved as per your goal, there is no point in using your entrepreneurial passion only to keep on plodding in terms of business revenues and business profits, because you have in you certain characteristics which others do not possess. You might as well use it for different areas. So, the moment you feel that you have achieved your first entrepreneurial goal, and then you can leave that role model to somebody else, then you have become a good person who has done this. Then and also this transformation from being an entrepreneur to transferring his entrepreneurship to a leader is helpful, because he is institutionalizing the entrepreneurial zeal which he has, and he is helping diffuse the entrepreneurial management across the company. Does transition to mainstream industrial status reduce entrepreneurial passion? In several cases, yes. Entrepreneurs who have become creators tend to become preservers, but even after the firms reach a kind of maturity stage, they tend to stay on. Secondly, once you become a mainstream industrialist, you get along with that role certain status, social esteem, perception of being a good businessman or business person who has not tasted any failure. So, people are unwilling to lose that particular role and status and go on again on an entrepreneurial journey. Thirdly, as one ages, one becomes more cautious. Entrepreneurs are no exception. So, as they age, they become risk averse. Therefore, typically business history indicates that the first 2 decades of entrepreneurship is the golden period of entrepreneurship, where a person sets up a company, ramps up, preserves it, nurtures it, takes it to leadership position in the industry. That is the golden period of entrepreneurship. Successful entrepreneurs transform at that point of time, hand over their firms to other leaders, and then go into newer entrepreneurial launches. So, the institutionalization of entrepreneurial thinking is extremely important, so that they can create a broader entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. So, to get into the skin of an entrepreneur and ask this question, is working as an entrepreneur exciting? Without doubt, yes. The reason is entrepreneurship is a self chosen avocation. It is based on one's own attitude and personality that drive entrepreneurship. Secondly, the entrepreneur defines his rules of game. He understands his or her boundaries. He works with his mind, heart and guts simultaneously. Therefore, an entrepreneur is able to connect himself or herself with the internal team as well as the external team very effectively, and there is a kind of socialism in the way an entrepreneurship functions. This leads to genuineness, ownership and excitement in the team. Apart from that, entrepreneurs enjoy certain psychic benefits within quotes. They believe that their abilities have been singularly responsible for the growth of their enterprises. Most of it is true, but that provides lot of psychic joy. Then they believe that it is their pluck, resourcefulness, hard work that has created the entrepreneurial enterprise and how it has differentiated with others. So, many times you can see entrepreneurs talking in terms of I rather than we. which is a psychic benefit part of the whole system. But unfortunately at times this psychic hangover oftentimes lasts far beyond the reaching of the peak by the company, and then the excitement which would come from launching really new entrepreneurial companies and then taking them to the newer peaks, that is substituted by this psychic imaginary that yes, I have done that all that I could do. Therefore, it is requiring an emotional balance alongside the risk reward balance for you to be an entrepreneur who can be on the go always. Then the question is it exciting to work with entrepreneurs? Largely yes. The reason is entrepreneurs are likely to be very aspirational. They stretch themselves, but they stretch the team members as well. They are rational, questioning, they are energetic, bubbly, they fizz with ideas and optimism, they believe in individuals, they let people experiment. These characteristics brings out the best in the people, and therefore people have a lot of self actualization as they work in their entrepreneurial ventures. But in the strengths of the ventures of the entrepreneurs, there also come with certain weaknesses. One, they fail to draw the line between being inspirational and excessively rabble rousing. That is talking about the company all the way, believing in what they are doing beyond a point of truthfulness. That is one of the fallacies of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs also get excited about too many ideas. They would like to do everything, and in that process they cross certain prudential norms of management. At times their relentless optimism, which actually stokes their passion, it gets them into dangerous territories, which is caressed by what we may call foolish risk taking. They deny reality and insist in their ventures beyond all reasonableness. Most entrepreneurs also fail to delegate. It may be all right when you are the first employee as a founder to do many things, but 3 years down the road it is not the right thing to do, but many entrepreneurs fail to delegate. Then some entrepreneurs also get surrounded by people not so competent, therefore they feel that whatever they are doing is always right and successful. Had they been surrounded by people, when they overreached they would have been corrected. So many of the entrepreneurial firms which are seeing certain issues today are in that state mainly because they have not got the right CXOs to advise them in the right manner. Therefore, entrepreneurs who leverage their strengths and deleverage their weaknesses, they are likely to have lot of exciting opportunities for their team members. And finally, do entrepreneurs create expanding role of entrepreneurship? This is actually an absolute must, because the entrepreneurs are not only the inventors, they are the makers and the builders of a nation's economy, and economies need momentum of growth, and for that entrepreneurs have to create more entrepreneurs. It is not enough for entrepreneurs to seek continuous rewards for themselves as the best entrepreneur or as the most efficient entrepreneur. It is important that entrepreneurs take up the challenge of creating more entrepreneurs. In that regard, I feel that Indian entrepreneur system has not done enough to create more entrepreneurs. I have not seen those companies having their supply chains creating more new vendors as entrepreneurs. I have not seen more new dealerships being created as entrepreneurial ventures, or a banker who has been a successful corporate banker trying to promote more entrepreneurs create their own shadow banking ventures, things like that. Therefore, I feel that while a lot has been done in the entrepreneurship area by great people, far more can be done in creating a virtuous and expanding circle of entrepreneurship, because that is the one which will differentiate our country from other countries as we try to go for this $5 trillion economy challenge. We have earlier considered certain entrepreneurial enigmas which are actually a natural concomitant of the entrepreneurial journey. However, these enigmas need to be addressed so that entrepreneurs are able to realize their full potential. In fact, entrepreneurial discovery, which is the theme of this series of lectures, is the very genesis of this problem identification and problem solution. we need to discover the nature and extent of entrepreneurial personality in ourselves if we are supposed to be entrepreneurs, and that is the requirement for being an effective entrepreneur. Entrepreneurial discovery is a combination of the intrinsic entrepreneurial personality, which we have considered earlier and which we would also consider in the succeeding lectures, acquired entrepreneurial experience and expertise as one embarks upon the entrepreneurial journey, and the organizational and environmental expectations. Just because we have a certain type of entrepreneurial personality and just because we have had certain experiences in ramping up in certain experiences in establishing and ramping up our entrepreneurial enterprises, it does not mean that the external environment is likely to be supportive of those moves. Therefore, we also need to be very cognizant of how the entrepreneurial environment is shaping up and what are the expectations that arise out of the changes in the environmental expectations. Assessment of the entrepreneurial and personality can be achieved to a great degree by personality assessments, by talking to peers and understanding one's own capabilities and competencies. Similarly, the acquired entrepreneurial experience can be assimilated and interpreted by the entrepreneur. However, the caveat here is that one requires a significant amount of introspection and reflection to be able to understand the experience and expertise and its impact on the entrepreneurial journey. Similarly, responding to environmental expectations, organizational expectations also depends on a little level of reflection and introspection on the part of the entrepreneur. So, having said this, let us see how these enigmas can be addressed. The first enigma is how to perpetuate the entrepreneurship. Now, when we talk about perpetuation, we do not talk about in any negative connotation. We talk about the positivity of having entrepreneurial spirit in an organization. So, how do we do that? So, an entrepreneur can be a perpetual entrepreneur when he or she avoids the pitfall of running the scaled up entrepreneurial firm as a bureaucratic firm. We have considered and we would also consider in subsequent lectures how an entrepreneurial firm, when it becomes a mainstream company, tends to become very deliberative and very bureaucratic as well. Therefore, one of the first criteria for becoming a perpetuating entrepreneurial organizational system is to avoid the pitfall of getting bureaucratic. Therefore, to be an entrepreneur for perpetuity, one needs to do four things. One, professionalize oneself and the organization. Second, build strengths and resilience in the organization. Third, embed the entrepreneurial thinking in the professional leaders. And fourth, encourage nonlinear growth through entrepreneurial product market moves. Only when you encourage your organization to be entrepreneurial, which means that you got to have disruptive growth or nonlinear growth, would you have the spirit of entrepreneurship flying high in the organization. Similarly, to perpetuate entrepreneurship, the entrepreneur would need to develop more entrepreneurs in the system. Just as a good leader is a good leader only when he develops capable leaders in the system, an entrepreneur is also likely to be an effective entrepreneur only when he develops other entrepreneurs in the system. This requires that the entrepreneur should surround himself with people who can mentor and guide the entrepreneur on the course of professionalization of the company without any dilution of the entrepreneurial spirit. Therefore, a board of advisors is very well advised. This kind of reflection and introspection on entrepreneurs' own goals will help the entrepreneur surely establish and embed a system of entrepreneurship, a culture of entrepreneurship forever in the organization. This is how this first enigma is addressed. Now, the second enigma is what are the limits to growth of an entrepreneur. So, we got to set certain reasonable limits when we look at the growth of entrepreneurial firms. Just because an entrepreneur has been able to set up a business from scratch and brought it up to, let us say, 100 crores or 1000 crores, it does not mean that from there would be exponential growth thereafter. As industries scale up and mature, the entrepreneurs who are running those firms must be cognizant of the fact that there could be limits to growth. And those limits to growth would probably come from the plateauing of the demand for such kinds of products, also from other entrepreneurial firms coming up with superior products. To be able to understand the limits for growth and also establish new limits for growth, an entrepreneur would like to be and would need to be in a state of perpetual technological innovation, which means that the entrepreneur has to be a learning entrepreneur always. He would need to assimilate and innovate new technologies continuously. He would need to innovate on new business models continuously and also be on the lookout for next mega trends. In fact, he should be in the forefront of making new mega trends. Limits to growth are a natural concomitant of the development of an industry and the maturity of a market. The only way the limits to growth can be reset or redefined is through newer technological developments. Having newer operational models can take the growth limits little higher, but if you really want to reset the limits to a much higher level of trajectory, we need to have disruptive growth. Therefore, entrepreneurs need to have a disruptive technological mindset in the organizations they are heading. That is how the second enigma would be addressed. The third entrepreneurial enigma is managing mainstream transition. We said that as the company becomes a mainstream company, the entrepreneurial company needs to professionalize the management. In talking about the enigma number 1, I did say that to be able to perpetuate entrepreneurship, the entrepreneur needs to professionalize the organization, but at the same time embed entrepreneurial thinking in the organization. So, what happens when professional leaders enter the organization? The transition to the mainstream and maturity in a particularly questioning marketplace requires certain mainstream leadership skills. Even tech giants such as Google and Facebook had to have very capable mainstream leaders to be able to steady the waters as the startups navigated the stormy waters of startup ramp up. So, to be able to effectively manage this mainstream transition, an entrepreneur would need to understand that the mainstream organization has to look beyond the founders and the founder families, and this is achieved by the entrepreneurs by delegating the decision rights, roles and responsibilities to the newer professional leaders. It is not just enough to have professional leaders in the system, but the entrepreneur should be able to delegate the mantle through appropriate decision models and decision roles to the mainstream leaders. And also the entrepreneur himself or herself should transit to a non-executive position in the board and also take on the role of building newer entrepreneurial firms if time were to permit, and even retire from active entrepreneurship formally. So, mainstream transitions in entrepreneurial firms tend to occur seamlessly. Even the entrepreneur himself or herself may not be able to notice that this company is transiting from a startup culture to a mainstream culture, and is also therefore having certain major changes the way the organization is managing itself. It is important that the spirit of reflection and introspection, which I have mentioned in the past, is fully alive and fully developed in an entrepreneur, so that he is able to understand the transition challenges and also take care of the changes which are required to make the transition more effective. Enigma number 4 is maintaining the excitement. Entrepreneurial firms are exciting firms, and that is why they grow, and that is why they are able to bring aligned team members on board, not necessarily based on compensation or stock options, but on the basis of a shared vision and strategy. Now, when the entrepreneurial firm becomes scaled up, it would have its own products which are proven in the markets, and the products will grow as a particular clip. But how do you ensure entrepreneurial spirit and excitement in such a situation? Many entrepreneurs try to do that by having a more adventuristic goal, a more demanding work environment, or even more challenging goals. If one is very successful in India, one would like to go into US and try to make this entrepreneurial journey happen in that region too. That is one part of it, but only adventurous and stressful moves would not necessarily create entrepreneurial excitement. Entrepreneurial excitement typically comes when you are creating something new out of nothing, and you are able to create a novel business model around the novel product. Having an innovative spirit, both technological and business oriented innovative spirit ingrained in the entrepreneurial system is extremely important to ensure that there is excitement all through the years of growth of an entrepreneurial firm. To be able to do that, an entrepreneur would need to have certain skills, and those skills are: 1, the entrepreneur should always rely on innovation as a means of retaining competitive advantage. Second, one of the hallmarks of entrepreneurial system is the ability to connect with each other on a shared mission and strategy. Therefore, connectivity with the people is also extremely important even when the company has ramped up to a big scale. Thirdly, there should be opportunities provided to the team members to take up entrepreneurial challenges all by themselves. And fourthly, there should be forums and platforms in the organization to celebrate new events, new developments and successes. That ensures that excitement remains in the entrepreneurial firm even when it crosses the numbers of thousands in their employee count. The pathway to sustainable excitement in an entrepreneurial firm, to diffuse the spirit of excitement, the opportunities for excitement all across the hierarchy. What has happened at the product level in the initial years needs to be permeating every role and responsibility that the organization has. That is how the fourth enigma is addressed. Then the fifth enigma is remaining inspirational. An entrepreneur achieves what he or she has achieved by being an inspiration to the rest of the people, not only within the organization but also in the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem. And they are typically being passionate, energetic, committed and competent. Given that, there could also be this temptation of being larger than life, as I alluded to when I spoke about the enigmas. But being larger than life does not mean that an entrepreneur would always be doing certain things which are invincible, that he would always be doing things which are impossible to achieve, because entrepreneurs as well as the entrepreneurial organizations are living beings. There are certain constraints and restraints which cannot be broken, whatever be the level of entrepreneurial spirit. It must be a set of realistic values, set of realistic appreciations of the environment and internal capabilities. Entrepreneur would need to retain the humility and the authenticity of early inspirational years when the entrepreneur looks at the future with confidence and competence, but also a certain degree of trepidation as to how he or she would master the vicissitudes of entrepreneurial journey. That is that vulnerability which is also supported and strengthened by the confidence and competence as well as passion and energy. That is the overall entrepreneurial personality, and that the entrepreneur should be able to retain and be inspirational. He would become inspirational when he delegates the decision rights, responsibilities and accountabilities, as I mentioned earlier also, to his or her team members, admitting own faults and mistakes in managing this entrepreneurial journey and remediating them as the entrepreneur moves forward, encouraging employee entrepreneurship, that is, even if the employee idea is not immediately relevant for the organization, enable the employee to work on those kinds of ideas and if necessary even spin them off as new ventures, and celebrating team ideas and successes. So, there is a little kind of overlap in this and in solving the enigma of mainstream transition. So, an entrepreneur will remain the pole star of inspiration by demonstrating as a way of life at all times to the organization the same mix of entrepreneurial skills and attributes that brought the team together in the first place and inspired the team to achieve something which is very difficult to achieve for normal organizations. That is how this enigma 5 is addressed. Then we come to the enigma 6, which is creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem. When we talk about enigma 6, it is not about the entrepreneurial firm shining alone in a landscape where other companies are pedestrian and other companies are dimmed in comparison with the entrepreneurial spark that exists in an entrepreneurial firm. In fact, the real entrepreneurial company creates an entrepreneurial ecosystem wherein all the tier 1 suppliers, tier 2 suppliers, the vendors, the dealers and all the ecosystem members also become truly entrepreneurial. When that happens, it is not just a firm that is developing in the marketplace and in the social milieu, but an entire group of firms and even an industry which is developing in the national firmament. We have discussed and we also have certain lectures set in the future course paradigm that an entrepreneur contributes to a nation not merely through the firm but also through the cluster of firms which is broadly the ecosystem that the entrepreneur is able to create. So, it is beyond creating new jobs and creating a new wealth. Entrepreneur helps the system by creating a totally new entrepreneurial ecosystem. Their role is just not disrupting a business model which has been established. The role is not merely in terms of changing the sclerotic forms from being what they are to some forms which are challenged, or some forms which are exiting, or some forms which are renewing themselves. Their goal is much beyond that. They are together going to be a community of change agents who usher in technological and industrial transformation in a nation. Therefore, every entrepreneur must do his or her bit to establish and develop an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and this is primarily achieved when entrepreneurs do four things. One, promoting confederations and institutes of entrepreneurship. Just as professional leaders have got together and set up their confederations of industry, their associations of industry, which are nothing but groups of established firms by and large, entrepreneurs need to create their own confederations and institutes of industry which are brought together through entrepreneurial means, so that the spirit of entrepreneurship is well studied, well researched and well bonded in those initiatives. Secondly, entrepreneurs should not keep themselves aloof from the mainstream activities. They need to actively participate in public events. They need to lead advocacy efforts with various agencies of the governments and with the governments and the political establishments to promote entrepreneurship. And finally, they should use their wealth and expertise and their enterprise, the spirit of entrepreneurship, to create indigenous funds, indigenous funding mechanisms for supporting local entrepreneurship. So, an entrepreneurial ecosystem gets created in the country when entrepreneurs see themselves not merely as capitalists who are establishing newer companies to earn market capitalization or business valuation, but when they see themselves as change agents, as transformative agents for the national economic system. That is very important to address the enigma. There are two things. What we talk about passion, we talk about energy. Passion is invisible, we talk about it all the time, but it is invisible. But what is visible is energy. So, we can compare it in two ways. Passion is the spark, energy is the fuel. So, if you have all the energy, but not passionate, that fuel is not sparked to provide the motive power. That is the kind of relationship. Without energy, passion dims, because you are passionate about doing something, but you just do not have the energy. Then how do you really fulfill the goal of your passion? Whereas energy drives the results, but it requires sustainability over the path. Passion is the motivator for you, whereas energy provides the motive power. Passion provides the aspiration for you, whereas energy leads to achievement. So, if you have a good combination of passion and energy, knowing that passion without energy and energy without passion are in a way purposeless, they must exist in balance for you to be successful entrepreneur. How do you discover all these things? We have talked a lot about looking at entrepreneurs, working with entrepreneurs, learning about entrepreneurships as we go through the studentship or early experience. We also talked about being a first year student still having a startup venture, or being an early executive and starting a startup venture. How does this happen? What exactly are the mechanisms? Because entrepreneurship cannot be taught. We have in IIT Madras an MS program is in entrepreneurship, because that is focused on encouraging students to develop their own entrepreneurial project alongside the coursework and then successfully launch it. We also have many people who are working as startup founders even as they are doing their curriculum. But for general student population, what we have are boot camps. Boot camp is a typically short, intense and tough program for beginners in the entrepreneurship. This is a kind of gameplay, an enduring and grueling training session to prepare the participants to the rigors of entrepreneurial discovery. It is used in military settings, it is used in artistic settings, it is used in theatre, so that you come up with your own solutions to the problems. and several global educational institutions including INSEAD and Harvard, Stanford, UC Berkeley, they offer these kinds of boot camps. These test our innate entrepreneurial appetite and jumpstart the entrepreneurial adventure. So, they understand what it makes, they understand what is planning, they understand what is organizing, how to raise resources, how to transform an idea into a kind of workable proposition. Those are the things which come in that. Therefore, boot camp is an invaluable first step in the entrepreneurial journey. We have in India certain companies which are offering the boot camp experience, but not many educational institutions have the boot camp as part of the educational journey. When we have incubators, very powerful incubators like IITM Research Park, which we have adjunct to IIT Madras, we have got a great opportunity to provide boot camps for entrepreneurs to come up with their own entrepreneurial self-discovery process.